Many Charleston residents are concerned about the proposed Union Pier Redevelopment plan in downtown Charleston. Today, I talk one-on-one with the Historic Charleston Foundation's Executive Director, Winslow Hastie, for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Winslow Hastie, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Oh, you're welcome. Obviously, you're the Executive Director of the
Historic Charleston Foundation.
What's new? What's now here?
Well, a lot of what we're dealing with at the moment is the port's proposed redevelopment of the Union Pier terminal here in downtown Charleston. That's a huge focus of ours and has been for the last several months.
Let me take you right to it, because according to WCPD, and this might be a little outdated, but the South Carolina Ports Authority submitted a draft of their planned unit development to the city of Charleston on January 30th.
Yeah.
The PUD breaks down the proposed redevelopment of the 70-acre space. This draft includes 270,000 square feet of retail and commercial use, another 270,000 square feet of office space, a nearly 20-acre park, 600 hotel units, and 1,600 residential units. Concourse Street runs down the middle of the proposed mixed-use site, which would feature buildings as tall as 7 stories. So, let me ask you this, Winslow. Do we know what the basis on which the Port Authority is asserting their rights based on this Union Pier initiative?
Yeah, so, they're working very closely with a developer, Low Development, a group based out of Los Angeles, California. They do have a local presence there in Wild Dunes out on Isle of Palms. And so they have been tasked, the development company's been tasked with essentially getting the property rezoned in preparation for the port to then sell the property to the highest bidder. And there's a long story there that we can talk about, but to the highest bidder, and they're really trying to get it sold by the end of the year. So they really need to get it rezoned so that they can determine the value. Right now, it's zoned light industrial, and it's basically just a big parking lot with some old, warehouses on it. And so under that current zoning, it's sort of unclear really what can happen there. And so what they want to do is determine more clearly what can happen there so that they can determine the valuation and then sell it for as much as they possibly can, I think.
Do you all know what is the value right now for Union Pier?
Well, I mean, the value that I see is not necessarily in economic or financial terms. And the value to us as an organization is that this is an enormous chunk of waterfront property that has been closed off to the public for a long time, since probably the 1940s, roughly. And even before then, it was pretty industrial. So, really it's sort of never been accessible to the general public. And so here we have a huge piece of land. Probably when it's all said and done, about half of the land, about 35 to 40 acres, going to be able to be developed. But still, if you think about that in the context of downtown Charleston, that's a huge area. I mean, it's a completely new district of the city, on the waterfront, in the middle of the historic district. This is an unprecedented opportunity, and not one that we will ever see again. So it's just a massive opportunity. We are excited to see the property redeveloped. We are not trying to stop the redevelopment. We just want to make sure that the port and Lowe really, honors what they are saying they want to do, which is create a seamless extension of downtown Charleston out to the water. Unfortunately, they're saying those things, but when you actually look at the documents that they've submitted, and they actually just resubmitted an updated PUD, planned unit development, yesterday. Right. And so I've been spending a lot of today going through that document. It's 333 pages long, so you can imagine it's a lot to take in. But trying to understand, but at first blush, I can tell you, unfortunately, they still have not presented something that to us is a natural, seamless extension of the city of Charleston. They're, as you said, they're proposing 7-story buildings right up against the water. They're proposing to lift the entire site about at least a dozen feet above grade, above where it is today. so that the whole site or the bulk of the site can be 16 feet above sea level. And so, so you can imagine a 7-story building on top of 16 feet of fill. You're talking an 8-9-story building right on the waterfront. And for us, that is just unacceptable. I mean, we have some aberrations out there that we don't want to emulate, like Dockside is a horrible example. And actually, Dockside's a great thing to bring up because that building that's, I don't even know how many stories it is, 15, 16 stories right on the water, was done in the early 70s. Right. But it's what triggered the city to develop a height ordinance because they realized that if you didn't regulate height, that people might start doing inappropriate things like Dockside. And so while they're not proposing to go that tall, they're proposing to do something that's not just too tall, but too massive. The block sizes that they've created are huge. And, frankly, Quintin, seeing the kind of development that we're getting in Charleston these days, I have a couple of prime examples that we've kind of opposed over the last couple of years. One being the 295 Calhoun saga, or the Morrison Yard project at the foot of the bridge, shows you that if you zone something, the developers are going to max it out, and they're going to build out to every square inch of that property, and they're going to go up as tall as they possibly can.
So let me ask you: is the interior of the project too dense?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, it's too dense. They're proposing a strip of waterfront, sort of a promenade along the water, which is nice. It's a gesture, but to us, it's not nearly as robust as Waterfront Park. And we all know that Joe Riley kind of had this vision that we are wanting to continue, which is the sort of, he called it the emerald necklace, right around the edge of the city, so that everybody could access the waterfront for walking, for fishing, for just gazing out over the water, for connecting with the water, jogging, walking your dog, you name it. And we've done a good job of continuing that legacy from Waterfront Park, all the way around to Brittle Bank Park, and hopefully it'll continue. But, they propose a thin strip of green space along the water. I think it's really important to point out it's an area that they can't develop legally because it's out over the water. So basically, if you abandon, it can only be used for maritime uses, as in port uses, shipping uses, or public use, so public parks. So this idea that they're kind of giving this as a gift is not really accurate because they can't develop it anyway. And frankly, the taxpayers are going to be the ones that pay for it because they're going to use a tax increment financing district, which comes from the taxpayer.
So if you put a TIF that is on the Union Pier, how long will it be before the city see any tax revenue?
We have not seen the details of the TIF, so we really have no idea. But typically, you're deferring between 20 and 30 years.
Wow.
And there's a lot of questions around the financing structure of this deal. Many of which, most of which have not been answered. Those documents are not really included in the PUD that's been submitted. So we have a lot of questions, and we want to make sure that City Council and the Planning Commission are asking those questions, because at the end of the day, the city is going to be on the hook for those to not only develop those but maintain them in the future. And they're talking about some other complicated financing mechanisms like a municipal improvement district or a MID. But again, we don't know the details of that. And the other thing on the TIF, if you follow that kind of stuff, it's very boring, but it's an important way of financing infrastructure for these large-scale developments. And as of late, it's my understanding that the school district is not as interested in participating in TIFs because they're tired of deferring all this revenue that they want. And so they kind of, and if they don't participate, that changes the financing structure significantly because they're a big part of it.
So, okay, well, let me ask you this. If the project can't be without a TIF, say, for instance, then would you all be in favor of letting someone else come in, do the project, and actually lower the sales price?
Well, I mean, that's, you're kind of hinting at something that we've been pushing, which is, the sort of narrative around this that's been promoted by the port and by Lowe is that they have to zone it as densely as they are proposing to, at a minimum that dense, in order to generate enough value on the site to then get a TIF that's worth enough to pay for the infrastructure. And the way we look at that is a little differently. Rather than sort of backing into it like that, we would prefer, obviously the more dense and intensely you develop something, the more infrastructure it's going to require, first of all. So you're creating kind of your own problem by overly densifying the site. The other thing is, there are other sources of funding out there. I mean, President Biden passed a massive infrastructure bill. There's federal funding for resiliency projects. If you're combating climate change, sea level rise, flooding, resiliency efforts, there's all kinds of funding streams out there. And, with some of the outside experts that we've been talking to, they're saying they've almost never seen a project of this magnitude not seek other sources of funding. We've got federal, state, county, city.
Oh, yes.
So, this idea that they have to extract all the value on the sort of backs of the residents of Charleston, that ultimately is going to be detrimental, we believe, to the residents and the citizens of Charleston. We just don't think that's the right approach.
So what type of funding do they have now?
No idea. No idea. I mean, they're talking about this a TIF and a mid, but we've not seen the details of that. And the deal is this.
Yes, sir.
We don't even know. I mean, so Lowe has a pretty good setup or agreement with the port. They're not supposed to be automatically the developer, but it is structured in a way that very much tips in their favor. In that they get a right of first refusal, so it will be put out to bid. But I think there's not going to be a lot of bidders because whenever another group can come in and just match your offer and take it off your plate, it really chills a lot of interest because putting together a proposal for something this complex is expensive. I mean, you have to spend a lot of money to do your due diligence. If you're another developer that wants to look at this. I mean, they've had the benefit of the last 2.5 years of really studying this thing with all these top shelf experts. So they already have an advantage there. They already have the advantage of having the relationship with the port. Then they get a right of first refusal. And then if the port ultimately does not sell it to them, they get a 9.5% commission. And if you're talking about a $500 million project or somewhere in that ballpark, that's a huge chunk of money.
So if they don't get any bids for the project, then what happens next?
Then Lowe will bid on it and win, is what I would guess.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And I'm being redundant, Winslow, but is the interior of the project too dense?
Yeah. I mean, one of our big concerns outside of the height and the density as proposed today is the allocation of open space. We've talked a little bit about, they have this island park that they're proposing, which to me, there's a lot of questions around whether you can even do that from a regulatory standpoint. You've got to go through the Army Corps of Engineers, so you got to work with the state and DHEC and OCRM. And so there's a lot of regulatory agencies that are going to have to look at that. There's a lot of questions around, the structural integrity. Having a park out over the water is an extremely expensive thing to maintain. The city is going to, be responsible for that. So there's a lot of questions about the island park. So honestly, even though it's an interesting idea, we're not really giving a lot of focus and attention on that. So we're really looking at that promenade.
Right.
And then they have a couple of little green spaces scattered throughout the site beyond that. But our concern is there's really not enough open space kind of in the interior of the site, to your point, that would then invite the public, as in the residents in the adjacent neighborhoods, from the east side to Ansonborough to the French Quarter downtown, wherever, to feel comfortable that they can go out there. And so if you've got this wall of 7-story buildings blocking the public from the water, you won't be able to see the water because these buildings will obscure the view. And, it won't feel accessible or comfortable to, I don't think, a wide swath of our community. And so we really want some of that open space to be brought into the interior and scattered throughout.
So do you really believe this project is really a private project?
Yeah, I mean, it's being treated as one. I mean, the port, famously, you talk to everybody and they say, well, the port acts like a public agency when it behooves them, and they act like a private agency when it behooves them, and they're somehow able to kind of work this gray area, which seems strange to me. As far as I'm concerned, the State Ports Authority is a state agency, and they have a responsibility to the public.
Sure.
I know their mandate is economic development for the state of South Carolina, and I appreciate that. But I do think they also have a responsibility to the citizens of our state to respect us and to also think a little differently about how their former land might get developed. I think they have a mandate. This land is in the public trust right now. And I think there is a mandate that they think a little bit differently, not like a cutthroat private sector developer, but think like a public agency about what is best for this community, while at the same time making money. I mean, let's be honest, I get it. They need to make some money. They want to invest that in the Hugh Leatherman terminal. I don't hold that against them. That is, Barbara has a mandate from her board to generate as much money out of this as possible. But nonetheless, we're just going to continue to push because we don't think it's the right approach.
And I hate to be redundant again, but how much money do you think they will ultimately generate from this?
I mean, I really have no idea. It's so hard to know. I've heard $500 million. I've heard $300 million. Mm-hmm. Again, so much of it's going to depend on, the zoning that they get. And so this plan unit development, the thing about a PUD is you're writing your own zoning. So you can do sort of I don't want to say there are no rules. There are rules. There's some parameters around the PUD, the Plan Unit Development Ordinance. But it's really the intent of a PUD is to get creative, innovative, to sort of bend the rules to suit a certain site, a unique site, which this one is. And so as far as we're concerned, there is an opportunity to do something really visionary, something creative, innovative, that to us is reflective of the 21st century values of Charleston, right? We are a global city now. We are on the international stage, and shame on us if we are just going to do a profit-driven, developer-centered development on our waterfront, the last bit of waterfront that we have, and not do something that is, something that we can all be proud of for generations to come. I mean, that's really honestly where we're coming from.
And I hate to be redundant, but why this? Why now? Why not 10 years ago or 20 years ago versus now?
Well, that's a complicated question. Obviously, there's the cruise ship sort of arguments and fights over a new cruise terminal, which, thank goodness, due to a lot of advocacy from our groups, they've walked away from investing a ton of money in a cruise terminal and then having a bunch of surface parking around it, which is what they wanted to do back in 2010. So it's been caught up in the cruise debate. I think it's also, the port had other priorities, right? They had the construction of the Leatherman terminal. They had updates to Columbus Street, updates to the Wando Welch, and then, of course, one of the biggest things is the harbor deepening.
Right.
So, they had other priorities, and they've of course, got all their inland operations to focus on, too.
Sure.
So I just think the timing, all of a sudden, it was like, okay, we did all these things. We have this asset. It's worth a chunk of money, certainly. Some people say they think it might be the most valuable real estate on the eastern seaboard. I don't know. I can't answer that. But, they now have needs to invest further in the Hugh Leatherman terminal. I don't know the details of that. That's just something that Barbara said very publicly, that's where this money would go. And so that, as far as I know, that's what's driving the timing.
And I hope to get Bob and Melvin on Quintin's close-ups this summer so we can talk more in depth about this.
Yeah.
But this might be a silly question too, Winslow, but in your opinion, is this a never fill and bill approach?
Yes, it is. And that's a bigger part of this question that I've been asking about, sort of visionary, creative approaches to development. My organization was super involved in the Dutch dialogues, in bringing teams of experts from both the United States and the Netherlands to Charleston to really think creatively about how we want to address flooding and sea level rise into the future. And there's a lot of arguments to be said that the approach to this development is just using the old school model, fill and build, build up the site as much as you can. They claim that somehow that's not going to impact, surrounding neighborhoods. I don't quite understand that. They say they're going to have big drains and big pipes and all that, but we've seen it happen. West Edge is a great example. They really built up that site for the, particularly the site across the street from the Joe Riley Stadium. And Haygood Street has horrible flooding, and it's way worse than it used to be. And I think a lot of that has to do with how they elevated the site. They brought it up they didn't even bring it up nearly as high as they're talking about here, but they brought it up, 8 feet or something. And, when you change the topography of the land, it's going to have impacts on stormwater runoff. And so we have real concerns around the stormwater and resiliency aspects.
And I want to get to that in 30 seconds. But so if this is going to be, hypothetically a fill and build approach, why would fill and build be ideal for the peninsula and not Johns Island?
That's a good question. I don't know. I really don't know. It isn't, as far as I'm concerned.
Now, speaking of the city of Charleston, where is the water management infrastructure for all of this?
I mean, it's going to be big. It's a very old school approach. They're going to have big pipes. They say they've got 2 outfall pipes coming from, I think it's Hazel Street and maybe Lawrence Street. There's 2 outfall pipes. They're going to make them bigger so they can handle more capacity, is what they say, and somehow that's just going to fix everything. They are going to have, they've, at least for now, as far as we can tell, and we're going to hold their feet to the fire, they want to propose some green infrastructure, some bioswales, and some storm gardens and rain gardens within the public right-of-way, which would be, a new approach for Charleston. But, we haven't really seen how those work yet. And so we've got a lot of questions. That is a big piece, and that's another huge aspect of this project that we haven't really seen a lot of information on.
Okay. Does the city even have a water management plan?
It does not. The Dutch dialogue sort of kicked off a whole series of policy changes at the city. One of them being creating a stormwater department, which we didn't have. So we did that, and then we updated the stormwater regulations. It took a number of years, and of course COVID slowed some things down, but we did pass the fill and build ordinance for the outer boroughs of the city. But one of the things that we've been pushed for is a comprehensive water management plan, which the city has never done, which addresses every type of water imaginable: stormwater, sea, storm surge. It includes groundwater, which we've never really studied and fully understood. Of course, that's an issue, because parts of the peninsula are sinking, as you know, there's subsidence.
Right.
And so that process is underway right now. And unfortunately, that consultant team has not been consulted for this project, which to me seems crazy. There's also another project that was supposed to be underway months and months ago and has strangely gotten delayed. And that is a new, what used to be called the downtown plan. So it's a plan for just the peninsula of Charleston. It's now being called the Peninsula Plan. And it's sort of an updated vision of where we want to go on the peninsula, which is very much needed. We've been pushing for it for a number of years and pushed for the funding, which they received. And for some reason, the project's gotten stalled. But again, that would be yet another amazing opportunity to convene a planning process around. There's some really key questions that haven't been asked, like what does the city want at this site? Yeah. What does the city need? Yeah. What do the citizens want? There really hasn't been a public process around that. Yeah. And those are really important questions to ask. I mean, do we need, what kind of parks do we need? Do we need recreational playing fields? Do we need ball fields? Do we need just playgrounds? Do we need a school? Do we need some kind of civic space?
Affordable housing?
Of course, affordable housing. Well, you don't need to ask me that question because I know the answer, and the answer is yes. We have a huge affordable housing crisis. The most recent city plan said that we need 16,000 units now, additional units. I mean, it's a serious problem. So there's no question that we need it, and yeah, I mean that's a whole other aspect of this. You know, they're proposing to put 50 units on the site, which is ridiculous.
Being that they're trying to develop this project, do you fear more gentrification will happen because of this project?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's just more, I mean, the way it's being proposed is that it's going to be, you know, second homes and apartments, hotels, office, and it's not being planned to be a actual neighborhood where people can live, maybe people can work there. But, you know, they've already said that they don't see much of the project being for sale, that it'll be rental. Right. So we've got a ton of rental apartments, and typically probably because of the prices that they'll be able to command there on the water, they're going to be extremely expensive. So these are going to be second homes or second apartments for third or fourth from people from Charlotte and Atlanta and DC and wherever else. And so, yeah, I think there's a gentrification concern. Again, back to the statement I said earlier about this being kind of in the public trust. To me, there's an elevated responsibility on the part of the port to do what the community do more than what, again, just a private sector developer would do. And, you know, land is the most important commodity when it comes to developing housing because it's so expensive. Yes. And here you have this incredible opportunity. They basically were given this land many years ago. They've never paid taxes on it, obviously. And now they're going to sell it for a ton of money and then not have a mandate that a range of housing types be put on there. I mean, and I'm not saying it just all should be, you know, Section 8 or, you know, 30% of AMI, affordable housing, though we do need that. Okay. But we need the full spectrum. We need workforce housing. We need, you know, smaller scale housing so that it's not just luxury.
Going back to that peninsula plan, what exactly does the city want right now with all these people moving here from Nashville, Atlanta, Charlotte to come to the city? Oh.
That's what these plans are supposed to do is to help establish a vision, and I think that's really where our frustration, that's where kind of the buck stops, is that there's just been the kind of visioning for this site is non-existent when it coming from the city. And so basically what they're doing is just reacting to what is being proposed by a developer whose interests are counter to the city's, frankly, because their interests are being able to develop this as dense and as much as they possibly can so they can get higher returns, right? So theirs is completely, it's a profit motive, it's profit driven, whereas the city needs to be putting forth civic values, like what is it that we need as a community, as a city, and how can we make sure that those things get placed here?
So what civic values would be ideal for this project?
Well, I mean, like I said, additional, more meaningful open space, opportunities to interpret the history of the site. You've got the Bennett Rice Mill, of course, but there's a mosquito fleet. And I know there's been some, you know, a little bit of talk about that, but I don't think it's been robust enough. I think there's ways of thinking of doing some interesting programming that could complement the International African American Museum. There's the history of sort of the working waterfront of Charleston. You have a great opportunity to talk about that, about the maritime history of Charleston. You know, there's housing, there's resiliency and stormwater improvements that could happen, storm surge improvements that could happen. You know, also, frankly, I mean, I'd love to see a beautiful, more appropriately scaled waterfront district where you and I could go and have a beer on the waterfront. You know, I mean, wouldn't that be nice? There's not a lot of places along the water. You can walk along it, but there's not a lot of places where you can hang out and enjoy the view and have dinner. So I think there's, you know, I think an amazing like seafood market. We've been studying other cities around the country and what they've done for these sort of civic kind of landmark spaces. I don't know if you've ever been to Seattle, but they have something called the Pike Place Market, which is this incredible seafood market. Like, we don't have that in Charleston. Wouldn't it be great if there was somewhere where you could go and get, all kinds of fresh seafood and the fishermen and the shrimpers and crabbers and stuff. We've got Shem Creek. We got to drive all the way over there. Wouldn't it be great to have that in downtown Charleston? That's just one example. I mean, it may be some kind of neat, event venue for the symphony.
Sure.
Where you could do some sort of outdoor concerts. I mean, I don't know. I don't have all the answers, and that's part of the thing. Is that's why you go through a kind of community-led planning process. Is we don't know until you legitimately hear and solicit feedback from the public, and that just hadn't happened.
And what housing style would be ideal for this project? What should be that ideal housing style?
Well, like I said, I think it's the range. We really need housing for the lowest income people. We need housing for upper low income people. I mean, really the whole spectrum, as I said. And there's ways that you can bake that in. Different housing types where you have townhomes and you might have some single family, you might have some townhomes, but all we're getting now are just these huge multifamily, massive, again, like the Marston Yard project. It shows you what will happen if you let the private sector run rampant. That's what we're going to get.
And what else do you expect you all will get out of this project if the city and the community does not come together along with the port?
I don't know. It's really going to fall to the resolve of the Planning Commission and the City Council. I'm really hopeful that they're going to ask the hard questions and push back. We all know the port is very powerful politically, but I really hope that our elected officials and our commissioners will stand up for what this community needs and wants and push back because it needs to happen.
And I will hope to speak to the mayor of the city of Charleston and like I said, Barbara and the city council soon to get more their take on this as well.
Great.
Winslow Hastie of the Historic Charleston Foundation, thank you for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Folks House.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.